In this tutorial, we will cover user attributes. With user attributes, we can give objects in our maps, such as buildings, a specific function. First, we need to open the window where we create and set user attributes. This can be found in the menu under Window, User Attributes. Now we can see if an object has any user attributes attached to it, and if so, which ones. Of course, we can also create new attributes and delete existing ones. Near the windmill is a point we call a tip trigger. If we click anywhere near this point, the trigger will be selected in the scene graph. And as we can see, this object has a number of user attributes. The first attribute is a Boolean value, which we can identify by the checkbox. A Boolean attribute can only have two states, either on or off. The second attribute is a string type. Here we can enter text. In this case, we can give the trigger an attribute to accept crops, specifying what types of crops are accepted by the trigger and can be unloaded here. This is then followed by two additional Boolean type attributes. Here we have a script callback, which we can recognize by the name of the attribute onCreate. Then there's an attribute with multiple numerical values, which is also a string type. Likewise, the attribute stationName is also a string type. Individual numbers can also be used in float-type attributes. While not used here, there's another type of attribute, the integer type, which is also used to store numbers, but only whole numbers, no decimals. Now that we know what types are available, it's time to create a trigger to suit our needs. In our example, the trigger will be used for the sale of potatoes and sugar beets. For demonstration purposes, we will simply duplicate the existing trigger and delete all the user attributes. This will help us to better illustrate how user attributes are created. The most important element of almost any object with user attributes is the script callback. We select the element with the name script callback and assign the name onCreate. After that, we click Add. And we can see that the attribute has now been created. Now we need to specify what type of object we want to create. In our case, it is a tip trigger, so we enter tip trigger point onCreate. Next, we should specify which crops can be dumped. For this, we create another attribute of string type and call it fruit types. We give the attribute the value potato, sugar beet. Now we need to specify how much is paid out by this trigger for potatoes and sugar beets. For this, we create another string type attribute and call it price multipliers. For the value of this attribute, we will need to enter two numbers, one for each type of crop. These numbers must be separated by a space. The new selling point should have a name, so again we add another string type attribute and call it stationName. Feel free to give it a name of your choosing. Now we add three attributes of the Boolean type. They are appears on PDA, is area trigger, and is farm trigger. With appears on PDA, we can set whether the trigger is displayed in the PDA in the game. Is farm trigger specifies whether the trigger is for the sale or storage of a specific crop. Is area trigger lets us choose whether crops can be deposited in this area. We should set this to true so we can deposit goods here. However, we will then need an additional float type attribute called trigger width. We set the value for this as before. Now we need to create another two transform groups hierarchically below the trigger. But since we copied the trigger earlier, we don't need to do this time round. Now let's have a look at the two transform groups in more detail. The 2 points create a straight line along which goods can be unloaded when a vehicle or trailer is in its vicinity. This point on the vehicle is called the tip reference point, and depending on the vehicle, there may be more than one, such as when the vehicle can tilt in multiple directions. To make sure that the vehicle does not always have to be exactly on the line, but can also unload in the vicinity, we can give our trigger the trigger width attribute and set it to around 2 meters, taking us to the edge of the unloading area. We can check this value by shifting the start point of the line sideways. But watch out, we'll want to make sure we put the start point back before we save the game. The easiest way to do so is to use the undo function of the Giants editor.